What if I told you you could start a civilization from scratch? One of the first ones in the world. How would you do it? You could be the king, you could be the queen, but how would you actually do it? What goes into a civilization and where would you do it? This lesson puts us all the way back at the beginning and puts you in the position to figure out what has to happen. I'm Mr. Hull. This is Ancient History. Welcome to Classical Kingdoms, where timeless stories reveal truth and wisdom about your journey. And we're going to journey all the way to the beginning of civilization, and put yourself in that position where you could be one of the first kings or queens on the planet. And where are you doing it? We're going to study the Fertile Crescent, where rivers were like magic and allowed for agriculture. It allowed for people to thrive. And we're going to see what the challenges are if you're actually going to have to put together one of the original civilizations on our planet. This is the beginning of human civilization and the beginning of the story of Western civilization, from Mesopotamia to Canaan to Egypt. This is the Fertile Crescent. It's a lesson about geography. We have to understand what these rivers were like and what's around them and why we're not settling inside a desert. But these challenges that the ancient people would have had to deal with are going to become some of the greatest innovations of our time. These are ancestors that we all had that were born courageous. They were willing to take risks and figure out what it is they had to do in order to survive, not just at a caveman level, but at a high level, at a civilization level. So we're going to learn the building blocks of civilization. We're going to see the similarities and the differences as we go all across the Fertile Crescent, from Mesopotamians all the way to Egypt. This is the foundational building block. Well, what is civilization and how would you start one? This is lesson number 2 in your ancient history course. We're stepping into this story of the first civilizations, the first cities, the first farms, and we're going to ask some big questions to discover how it shaped history, and that includes your history, your journey. So this is the lesson that starts it all. So let's discover what this boomerang-shaped piece of land, this Fertile Crescent, has in store for us. And so we can reveal some of these challenges and answer some of these big questions. So first, let's study the rivers, the geography of the rivers and what they did to help civilization begin. Next, let's look at the world's first cities. Why would cities pop up on the rivers? We need them. Number 3, let's explore the engineering, the massive walls, the massive buildings, what would the bricks build for these cities and these early civilizations? And then finally, what about the jobs? People are going to have different jobs. Not everybody can be king. We're going to need some people to make the bricks and farm that land. So we will unpack what the jobs and what all these building blocks do to build a civilization. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the rivers. Which one should we start with? Let's go to the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. In the Fertile Crescent, this is all the way over on the eastern side, and this is where we find the earliest civilizations. Almost as early would be the ones in the Nile River Valley. But if we start in Mesopotamia and we look at the Fertile Crescent, where the Tigris and the Euphrates were giving life to these early civilizations, because those two rivers would flood. Those floods provide fresh water and farming opportunities, but it's not as easy as I just made it sound. Thousands of years ago, the climate might have been different. There might have been wet weather and precipitation falling in places that were further north or upstream from the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Imagine that this place, nowadays it would be Iraq, but imagine this place very different than how we look at it today, where legends have developed understandings. Religious text would say maybe the Garden of Eden is around this area, a beautiful area for human flourishing. But it involved significant amounts of challenge. Let's go all the way back to 4000 BC, where archaeological evidence could look and see that people were living in the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Why are they living there? Well, we're trying to get out of the Stone Age. Aren't you sick of the Stone Age, the Neolithic Stone Age where tools were made out of stones? Don't you want better tools than that? That's what we name the ages. We name the ages after how they made their tools. So the Stone Age is ending. The Neolithic Stone Age is when we saw evidence that settlements, we wouldn't call them civilizations back then, we'd call them settlements, were farming. Farming is the beginning of what gets us out of the Stone Age and into the Copper Age, the Bronze Age. That's what's coming next. Because they have to learn to farm. Now, what is farming? What's the difference? What were the cavemen doing, or the Stone Age settlements? How were people surviving? You've maybe heard of hunting and gathering. Hunting and gathering is finding food and eating it, right? Hunting for food, hunting for animals, and cooking them up. And as we see human development, as anthropologists and archaeologists look at the way humans were developing, they look in these places. They look at villages and settlements. And when you start to see evidence of farming, it's like a light was turned on. Something totally new is happening. People are now understanding that these rivers are providing opportunity to plant seeds in the ground, to wait, because nothing's going to happen for weeks, right? Have you planted seeds? Have you tried to sprout from seeds? Nothing happens for days and weeks. But these primitive people in 4000 BC already knew that by waiting, these seeds are going to turn into plants, and by cultivating, by caring for the plants, by helping the plants, they're going to have big crops. Let's grow barley. Let's grow flax and barley. Let's talk about those two early crops, 4000 BC on the Tigris and the Euphrates River in the ancient country. It's not really a country, but the region of Sumer. In the region of Sumer, farming is happening. Farming is evidence of the agricultural revolution. Stone Age is over. So now they have to settle and stay in one place if those seeds are going to grow into a crop that they could harvest months and months later. These wild plants and animals are now going to be crops and livestock, barley, flax, maybe some form of wheat like bulgur. They're going to have sheep and goats. And so 4000 BC, people are now settling and staying. They're not nomadic people, and especially in this region of the Middle East, nomadic people taking their goats and their sheep around to different places to get food and water. We have incentive as an early 4000 BC settlement, civilization, almost stay in one place and take care of these seeds. You're going to have an abundance of food. An abundance? You mean not just barely enough food to survive? You're going to have surplus food? Yeah, that's one of the requirements of your civilization. If you're still thinking like, hey, could I be the monarch? Could I be king or queen? You need to make sure that your people, that you have surplus. You have more than enough, that you have an abundance that you could barter and trade with. And that's going to encourage your civilization to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Your farming is successful because there's fresh water in those rivers. But I would warn you that the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, why are they flooding? We have to think that climate, that the way the rains are falling upstream, so that's up in the mountains. Go check out what's up in those mountains. Is there snow? Is there rain? Is it a steady amount? Or is it somewhat inconsistent? And by inconsistent, meaning sometimes these floods get a bit violent. They get a bit over the top. Literally, they're going to come over the top of the banks, cause destruction, cause some bad flooding. And your job as a king or a queen, you got to start controlling these floods. You've got to find ways to build complex systems of canals. Canals are going to be the waterway, kind of the roadway, the pathway for the waters. The dikes are going to be able to curve the water to go in certain directions. The dikes, the levees, reservoirs. With the Tigris and the Euphrates, you need reservoirs. You need areas that would collect and hold water that you could use for later on. Because when you look at the country of Iraq, you're looking at a very dry desert. Now, we said climate is different back then. And you would have to, as an ancient civilization, you have to deal with the fluctuations. That's what makes you a civilization now. You're smart enough to deal with the fluctuations, the changes, the challenges, the overflooding, the kind of drought years, because you have to have the river water. It's all about the river water. The Tigris and the Euphrates are going to magically provide the fresh water. And remember, the water's going to be muddy. What makes the water kind of muddy are fine silt particles, S-I-L-T, silt. And that's very nutritious, good soil. So you could have some really good soil. So the fact that civilizations settle here and that the farming revolution is happening here means that these people, these early settlers, are smart enough, strong enough, they persevere, they have the virtue that what it takes is hard work, and they are making it happen. Now, they're constantly coming up with new challenges. One of the new challenges they had with the Tigris and the Euphrates that we may not see Egypt having to deal with is that their system of irrigation, eventually the mineral deposits, the salt deposits, they start to pile up and really start to ruin some of the farmlands that previously had worked so well. So it's not as good of a system as what we're going to hear about in the Nile, in the Nile River Valley in Egypt, where Egypt is going to have a much kind of gentler, easier, even more magical river flooding experience. But the first civilizations in Sumer, in Mesopotamia, they're going to be very strong because they have to overcome so much struggle. The word Mesopotamia comes from the Greek, and it really means land between the rivers. And as philosophers and historians looked back in time and saw what incredible things the Mesopotamians did to start civilization where they did, and they call it the cradle of civilization. The land between the rivers is the cradle of civilization, the Fertile Crescent. The cradle of civilization is where this all started. They were amazed at how many challenges they had to overcome. Now, we're talking about geography, we're talking about the rivers. And so compare that. Let's look at Egypt. What does Egypt have that's similar and different? Well, the Nile River floods. The Nile River floods in a way that's gentler and more consistent. Herodotus was the Greek historian who famously called Egypt the gift of the Nile. The gift of the Nile, that it was so easy and abundant for the Egyptians to succeed. And so when we study Egypt, when you dig deep into what Egypt was able to do in their early days, you should compare the level of struggle that they had compared to the Mesopotamians, and Egypt may have extra resources and extra abundance. Are you thinking pyramids? They built pyramids. But don't worry, Mesopotamia's got some pretty cool buildings as well. When the Nile River flooded, it was more gentle. It was more predictable. It was less violent and kind of easier to control. The Egyptian farmers were able to practice a simpler form of water management. It's called basin irrigation. So everybody's digging canals and they're running their shadoofs. You see the shadoof. Say shadoof, because that shadoof was an invention probably from the Mesopotamians. Maybe sometimes Egypt claims it too, but a counterbalance, a fulcrum lever, and it would get water up out of the canals and into the crops. But just by building these levees, by building these low earthen walls, it traps floodwaters, it can saturate the fields, and the Nile was able to just channel all this in, and you get like a fresh layer of silt and topsoil every single year. So the Nile River flooding, the Egyptian people didn't have to deal with some of the challenges, the inconsistencies that Mesopotamians had to deal with. Herodotus famously calls Egypt the gift of the Nile. It was so magical because predictable flood guaranteed abundance. But here's another feature about this river. It's running straight through a desert. The Nile River is running straight through a desert. It's literally just a long, very skinny country existence that people have to stay very close to the river. Now, what does that mean? The desert is protection. I don't know if anyone thought of that already. Press the like button if you had thought that deserts on both sides are going to help protect your country. People cannot cross deserts. This is going to be a very important point in this ancient history class. You need to understand that we will not be talking about deserts. Well, we do. We just talk about them because nobody goes there. Nobody can cross through a desert. You can't carry that much food and water. So the river is an abundant life giver, and the desert is protection to keep your people safe from invaders. So trade and armies are just going to have to go north-south on the Nile River and not crossing over through the desert. The geography is going to be cities along the Nile River and settlements on the Nile River. And compare that to Mesopotamia, where the rivers are close together. They're creating an area of settlement and civilization, and that is where the first ones grew up. But they're going to have more challenges about fighting each other. There's not the natural protection in Mesopotamia that the Nile River provides to the Egyptians. Both rivers are magical. Both provide fresh water and silt, in addition to a variety of challenges that all these civilizations have overcome. And that's why we talk about them first, as they fill out the boomerang shape of the Fertile Crescent. Abundance and surplus and this farming, it's like magic. These civilizations develop, so what do we need next? The second segment, we talk cities. Let's talk cities. Why do cities come next? Do we have to have cities? Why can't we just live far apart from each other? Well, let's go back to the farming. What do you really need when you plant seeds into the ground? They don't do anything for weeks. They can't be harvested for months. So can you think about that for a second? Why do we need cities? Let's go to what's called one of the earliest villages. A lot of sources say Jericho is the oldest village on earth. Jericho being a small village that archaeologists love to dig and explore. Why? Because it dates way back to that Neolithic agricultural revolution as one of the earliest settlements, but it was more than a settlement because they had special geography where you would want to build a city, and it's going to remain a city. We're going to hear about Jericho a lot in the future because it's got a great location. What makes a city have a great location? What characteristics? You're going to be a hill. Build your city on a hill. That is, so that you can say, I have the high ground, build it on a hill. But do not build it on a hill if you don't have a water source. Jericho had a spring, it had a water source, it had walls, but people would still attack because that's such a valuable location. Archaeologists love to dig, they love to find how old some of these attacks or how old some of these struggles and walls, and Jericho is an incredible place to see. Jericho is part of the Fertile Crescent. It's not part of one of the flooding river systems. They were able to survive in a climate that is really good. It's a fertile land that they say is flowing with milk and honey. You've heard this before, maybe. Canaan, part of the Fertile Crescent, has water to the west of it. And you should know that when weather moves from west to east, the first place the weather hits after leaving water is going to get a really nice deal. They're going to have really good growing conditions. And so this area of Canaan is often called a land bridge. The land bridge between the Tigris, Euphrates, and the Nile River is part of the Fertile Crescent. Jericho is just one example that early settlements became a village, became a walled place with a spring inside, places that people would want to organize. Isn't this lesson about cities now, a lesson about civilization? Isn't it about organization? We need to have an organized system. Okay, so where are the big ones? Where did we get some big cities? Let's go to Uruk on the Euphrates River. Uruk is sometimes referred to as the world's first metropolis. 50,000 people could have lived there. 50,000. Like, how many is 50,000? If you could research your own living area, your own town, your own city, how far away from where you live would get you 50,000 people. I know what it is around here in central Ohio. That happens over and over again. This is Columbus, Ohio, Dublin, Ohio. They all have more than 50,000 people. So I wouldn't have to go too far to hit 50,000. Uruk, with 50,000 people, was a massive settlement. So they must have had an abundance of farming, of course, but they also must have had strong leaders. By the time 2900 BC comes around, Uruk, with 50,000 people, had a 6-mile wall. What do you need a wall for? And what do you build the wall out of? Because I thought Uruk on the river didn't really have a lot of rocks and trees around. It was really a dry, barren kind of area, except that the river brings this magical life. So yeah, that's true. A new job for people, a new invention, a new innovation. Invent clay bricks, and you could build 6-mile walls around Uruk and have the world's first metropolis of 50,000 people. Now, unfortunately, Uruk is not the star of this show. Uruk has to deal with the river changing course. These rivers are magical, they provide life, but they change course. They change. We have the problem with the mineral deposits. You've seen rivers cause changes in course by bringing so much material, so much dirt and silt. And so Uruk fell victim to some of that. So who is the star perhaps early on? It's Uruk. These are great names, right? The harbor city on the Persian Gulf. We have to look at a special map to see that is on the harbor, because again, rivers flow and bring magical farming and life, but they bring all this material to the end of the river, to the mouth of the river, whether you see it as a delta or in this map, it's 60, 70, maybe 80 miles of additional distance that have been placed by that river over the past 6,000 years. That's a lot. That's a lot of new land. So was once a harbor town, kind of lost its position, but there are spectacular treasures found in the royal tombs of Lots of clues, lots of archaeology of these early civilizations, gold and silver, precious stones, things that were found as far away as Afghanistan or India. It shows a global connection, already evidence that the Silk Road is active. It's started up. Uruk, successful, big, original cities, but victims of the environment, victims of the rivers doing some challenging things. And over the centuries, as the river shifted, the Gulf fills in, the city eventually will get cut off from trade routes and will become an abandoned place, which is kind of the way it looks now as you check out some of the sites in Iraq, like and Uruk. But at the time that these cities were at their highest, think about your own city, your own area of 50,000. Do you have a government, like a township, a town, a city government providing roads and buildings? Now let's think, we're trying to be king, we're trying to be monarch. What do we have to do? We have to have authority. We have to have authority to say, hey, we need a road here. We need a wall here. We need bricklayers here. We need farming here. And we need a government that sets rules about the farming. If we can put all this together, in addition to some other building blocks, we're going to have a civilization. Now visit classicalkingdoms.com for this full course experience. There are free sample lessons. There's deep dive research that you can download. There's reading, there's textbook reading. So don't miss out on this full course, because as we put together civilizations, you're getting the building blocks, the basics today from this lesson, but it's going to come up over and over again in all of your ancient history lessons to understand what a civilization really needs. And that takes us to our third point. Our third segment is the engineering. The engineering. A city is going to need engineering. As these cities grew, people began to reshape their landscapes with monumental buildings. In Mesopotamia, a walled city was a direct solution to the geographical vulnerability. They did not have the kind of protection with the deserts that the Nile River, that the Egyptians enjoyed. So they had to overcome that struggle. They developed the way to engineer walled cities. The open plains offered no defense, and the city's wealth was a huge, tempting target for people to attack. So they build massive mud brick walls. They had to invent mud bricks. with straw and baked in the hot sun. They did not have access to the stones. You're probably wondering, like, what are the pyramids made out of? What does Egypt have access to? They have a lot of access. With the mountains close by, they can get stone, the limestone. But in Mesopotamia, they had to invent clay bricks. They had to build these walls out of clay bricks. They had to use them to provide defense. But it's also building a wall around like-minded people. It's creating a society. It's creating a civilization. Inside the safety of the walls, people were freed from the need to always protect and fight and be warriors. And they're free to focus on what it is they want to focus on. Do you know what I'm about to teach you next? Can you sense that not everybody has to be a farmer? Not everybody has to be a fighter. We now are going to have specialization. Some of these early civilization words you should get excited about: surplus crops, specialization, the rise of full-time farmers, the craftsmen, the merchants, the scribes. By building a wall around your city, you're now building a group of people that is learning to specialize and be civilized. There's the word civilization. We're a civilized group of people living together inside and around these walls to protect what we know is incredibly important: the farming, the seeds in the ground that take weeks to sprout and months before harvest, and people are going to try to steal your stuff. So coming together as a society, as a civilization, protect you from the chaotic and dangerous world outside. There was a legendary king of Uruk. Maybe you've heard of the legend of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was celebrated for building these massive walls around a city. And of course, there's legends of Gilgamesh, stories that you should definitely investigate, because Gilgamesh, he has a real journey as he tries to understand the world. Gilgamesh is a big deal. But if he was actually a king and he did actually build walls to preserve the city of Uruk, he left a message behind in an epic poem. After one of his long journeys, he returns back to Uruk and realizes that his greatest legacy is the city he helped build and protect, the civilization he helped become the first legendary king, maybe the first king. He writes, he says, he tells the ferrymen, "Go up, pace out the walls of Uruk, study the foundation, the terrace, and examine the brickwork." He's flexing, he's cheering himself on, he's pointing out that the walled city was among his greatest accomplishments after journeying around the world looking for answers to all of life's questions. But it shows the immense pride that they took as they realized how valuable and meaningful cities were, and the engineering of the walls, the engineering of the irrigation systems, that's making civilization itself possible. At the heart of every Mesopotamian city is everybody's favorite building. You've been wondering about the pyramids in Egypt. Well, how about the step pyramid-looking structures called ziggurats? Maybe you've noticed them already. Ziggurat is very different than a pyramid. Egyptian pyramids are basically just big limestone tombs. Mesopotamian ziggurats are city centers. There is a huge religious component to this ziggurat. It showed you they had a piety. Is that a new word? To be pious. To lift your God up. You have a patron god, an important god of the city-state. You lift it up high and you put the shrine at the top of the ziggurat. What does that do? It shows you value, you lift up, you revere the patron god, your religion, your beliefs. But the ziggurat also stores your grains, has a place where scribes can record. They're going to record who owns what. It's a way to show organization to the city. It's a part of the city center, and it's a response to the landscape, because to be pious, you can't have your God, your shrine to your God, getting flooded by the dangerous floods, because in Mesopotamia, sometimes they're a little bit out of control. There aren't any natural high places. We can't build a city on a hill in Mesopotamia because there aren't any. So build your own hill. A ziggurat is like a man-made mountain, an artificial, sacred height that's built to connect earth with heaven. Have you ever heard of the story of the Tower of Babel? That comes from this region, and it's part of an understanding amongst these civilizations. The Ziggurat perfectly captures Mesopotamian beliefs out of a deep religious piety, but also human defiance against the chaos of the flooding rivers, but also as a way to organize your people, as a way to be a part of a civilization. And it's wild to think that engineering a ziggurat like this could show so much structure, so much specialization, so many jobs in such an advanced civilization as a place like and Uruk. It truly is a classical journey into history, virtue, and wonder as we wonder what these people were really like. We're learning quite a bit of them. So finally, the last segment about first kings, first leaders. Who was in charge of building these massive walls and structures? Let's think about the earliest forms of government, the institution of kingship in Mesopotamia. It's forged because of the geography, because of what the rivers do, because of the attacks, because of the need for brick walls. So the powers of the first kings are a direct response to the environmental, the social problems, what it takes to make a civilization. In these earliest cities, authority rested with the temple, and you often saw that these are priest kings. Have you heard of a priest king? As they roll up their religion with their need for government, the priest king. Two major challenges pushed society towards this new form of leadership, and the first was the need to just manage the complex irrigation systems that controls the floods. Even when the floods get out of the banks, we can dig canals, we can repair the dikes, we can settle disputes over the water, and remember the land. We have to be able to trust that the seeds we put in the ground are going to be ours 4 months later when it's time to harvest. But they rolled it into the religion. The priest king is going to run a good city. It's going to develop a trusted society, a civilization. The second challenge that a good priest king would have to get over is warfare, getting attacked. You got to have a solution. You've got to win your battles. You can't have the enemy constantly stealing your crops and breaking into your ziggurat and ruining your civilization, your city. So this open landscape that was easy to attack and invade and try to steal resources from your neighbors, that forced people to be strong, to have courage, to have perseverance and cunning, to be smart. Because a strong military leader is who you needed to be in charge, somebody that could defend the city walls and lead the armies to victory. So these successful war chiefs, these priest kings, are able to turn their temporary authority into a permanent, and then it becomes hereditary. What does that mean? Hereditary, that a child in your family, a son, in this case, the Mesopotamian kings were always men, and their sons would take over power after that, and there was heredity. It was primogeniture. You'll hear that word as well to describe royal dynasties. A successful Mesopotamian king, therefore, had to be master of all these things we've been talking about: the engineering, the warfare, the understanding of agriculture. The king's legitimacy rests on his ability to provide the things his people desperately need: control of the water for the irrigation, for the farming, the security, the engineering, the walls. And to be the priest king, it rolls into the religion, and you have authority. You have the higher powers holding you up as king. And so from this, we can see big lessons in that classical virtue of prudence, courage, and practical wisdom. And if you haven't already done it, would you please click the like button? It really helps this video and this channel for Classical Kingdoms to offer you a complete history course and this complete lesson about what makes civilizations. And this first king of this first civilization, city-state on the banks of the Tigris Euphrates River, similar to the way Egypt is going to rise up with the magical floods in the river, and the Fertile Crescent is going to fill up with these small civilizations all over 3000 BC, 2000 BC. As we get into the Bronze Age, we'll hear more and more about these ancient civilizations. So the geography of the land commands people to farm, societies to develop, civilizations to come together, and kings to rise up to lead them. And the story of that first civilization is a powerful reminder that history is rooted in the earth, the land, the geography, the farming, our need to just survive with food. But it's a lesson you can apply to so many other things. This unique geography that the early civilizations, they were just challenges that they had to overcome. You have challenges and you struggle and you overcome them. The Fertile Crescent provides the perfect opportunity, the cradle of civilization. It gave everything that they needed to start these early civilizations, to succeed, to thrive and grow. And certainly that could be your story as well. Civilizations that overcame the chaos and the conflict, and they get shaped by the stability and the order provided by the government, the ziggurat, the walls. So the long-term survival of these civilizations, these people group, it depends on their ability to overcome and adapt to their geography, to their situation, to their struggles. It's the same question I asked in lesson 1 about why are you here? What did your ancestors do that when they overcame struggles, they decide to come to a free country? They decide to build their people group up, their family. What gifts and challenges define who you are and how it shaped the people that you know? And what is your role in the future? What will you carry forward from this age? Thank you for taking the time to learn something that matters in all of history, and that includes your history. Some classical truth for your journey, because kingdoms rise and fall, power fades, but virtue endures.